Change can happen instantly or over time. Think of 911 versus the current pandemic. Both events devastating to countless people around the world. Do you remember where you were the morning of 9/11? Do you think you'll remember the spring of 2020? Probably. How can we not? We remember when a new life enters our family by saying happy birthday. Weddings, happy anniversary. Many of us remember the loss of a loved one. Whether 2 or 4 legs, we remember the heartache and the suffering that we went through before we had to let go. Events of joy, sadness, sudden tragedy, or ever-expanding uncertainty, we remember because how change makes us feel deep inside our core. Sometimes we celebrate, sometimes we shudder. I was only 18 and the sun was beaming with intensity that day. The kind of day that even when you were inside the shade, your skin still felt very warm to the touch. My task was to watch hundreds of patrons splashing and playing in the pool to beat the heat. I was part of a 20-member lifeguard team at one of the busiest pools. We had screaming kids, napping dads, gossiping moms, and I was a very tan babysitter, but I loved my job. By that time, I was already teaching first aid classes, teaching CPR, and I had started as a volunteer firefighter and rescuer at Mission Fire Department. And that day I was so excited because after work, I was headed to the fire department to volunteer for an overnight. And I was hoping for a very busy night on a very loud ambulance. Little did I know that change was already unfolding. At 7:09, the night of July 17th, 1981, change grabbed me and our lives and never let go. About 7:30, another lifeguard approached my chair and said, "Kim, I'm so sorry about your parents." Seeing the confused look on my face, he kind of stuttered and backed away and said, "I'm sorry, I thought you knew your parents were killed." I'm not sure who was more scared, him or me, but as he ran, I could see my manager approaching my lifeguard chair. And he said, "You need to get down." And I said, "I can't, I'm watching all these kids." And Mr. Wamsgans was so gentle and said, "It's time to get down." I did not want to leave that chair. I felt as long as I sat in that chair, nothing could go wrong. But eventually I climbed down, and when my feet hit the blazing cement, life as I knew it was gone. All I kept imagining was, who's gonna take care of us? Who's gonna walk me down the aisle? What's gonna happen? You see, change provokes a lot of questions without a lot of answers. About 60 minutes later, we received a phone call with a screeching, petrified voice on the other end. "The building's collapsed. We're trapped in the Hyatt." My mom tried to calm herself and she said, "We love you. We'll see you soon," and then disconnected. We learned later she found this panel of phones floating in the water. Because of all the building damage that had taken place, phones were just floating and she was able to make a connection, and we were very thankful. Metamorphosis was all around, but there were no boundaries, no time constraints, and seemingly no end. 4 hours later, my parents were rescued and taken to St. Mary's Hospital. ironically, by the same ambulance I was supposed to be in later that night. My mom was wheeled out of the emergency department, and she looked like she had been through a ribbon cutter. Her dress and her hose and her slip were just wet and red soaked ribbons hanging off of her body. Thankfully, she only had minor injuries, but we couldn't find my dad. And the nurse eventually said, well, he's probably in the morgue. And my mom argued and said, no way, we were talking in the ambulance. The panic just took over, and in a frenzy search, I searched every face, every room, every bed. Finally found him in a makeshift radiology department they had to set up because there were so many people with orthopedic injuries. He was strapped to the gurney, looking up at the ceiling all by himself, kind of crying. And I whispered to him, I said, hey, Dad, I've been looking for you. He said, hey, I'm glad you found me. Not sure what happened over the next couple of weeks. People fed us, took us to and from the hospital. They mowed the lawn. I tried to keep a list and write thank you notes when I could. Yes, I was an OCD Virgo way back in the day too, like I still am. Mom pulled glass out of her hair and her body for months. And we learned that was very common because of the impact of the glass inside the lobby of the hotel. Dad ultimately had 8 surgeries. He had a couple bones removed and eventually had to medically retire and be disabled from the post office. The tricky part about change is that it's never over. Thankfully, my parents were alive. My dad was alive. He walked me down the aisle, but us 3 kids took care of them. I returned to the crazy splashing kids in the pool and the blazing cement. And like today, all we talk about is the conversation about the pandemic. Back then, everyone asked, do you know someone who was crushed by the Hyatt? I eventually started answering no. When my sorority sisters suggested that the spring formal could be at the Hyatt because there were no more dead bodies in the lobby, I resigned as pledged class president and never looked back, never returned. No one realizes whether the change is sudden or tragic or expanded uncertainty. The circumstance is transforming and it doesn't ever let go. Good things come from change and good things came from our change. We have another day to check in with each other, along with the birthdays and the anniversaries. We always check in with each other every July 17th. If I could teach anyone anything, is be respectful of the change. Embrace it, good or bad. You can help others by just listening, because as you can see, after 39 years, it still shifts and changes me because it rocked my world. I'm the lucky one because my parents survived. They're not one of the 117 who died that night. And I consider those families and their changes. Same event, different adjustment. Be kind, be good. Embrace the only change. Embrace the only constant, and that's change. Thank you.